Welcome to Well Since You Asked Me, the podcast where curiosity sparks conversation. I'm Lynn, your host. In this powerful episode, I sit down with co-founder and president of the Black Autism Support Society, Kimacka Randall, for a heartfelt conversation on the intersection of race, autism, and community healing. We unpack the stigma surrounding autism in the Black community, the urgent need for culturally aligned care, and how delayed diagnosis, lack of access, and institutional bias are impacting Black families. From healing circles and parent education to creating safe spaces for children and caregivers alike, this episode is both informative and deeply personal. Whether you're a parent, educator, or advocate, this conversation will challenge and empower you to rethink support, language, and community. So grab your favorite drink, get comfortable, and let's get into it. Studies show that Black children are diagnosed with autism later than white children, often delaying access to critical early intervention services. I'm honored to have Kimacka here with me today, and we're going to talk a little bit about autism. It's impacted both of our families, and so this is something that's close to my heart, and I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Do you mind introducing yourself and tell us a little bit about your work?
Yeah, so thank you so much for having me here, Coretta. As you stated, autism is very, very close to my heart and my family. And so my name is Kimacka Randall. I am the co-founder and president of the Black Autism Support Society, where we just really look at the intersection of race and autism. And really our goal is to improve outcomes for those families impacted by autism in the Black community.
Yeah, and that's really one of the reasons why I reached out to you is because my son, has autism, so he's neurodivergent, and I live here in Austin. And it's been very challenging finding caregivers that look like him. And I just think that it's important for him to have access to that. So I was just doing a little Google search and I came across your site and I was like, this is amazing. So I'm very happy that you do this work. Can you share a little bit about, I believe you're a ABA. Do you practice that, or what are the therapies that you do in the
Yeah,
center?
so we are not an ABA center, right? We when we created BASE, or Black Autism Support Society, we didn't want to recreate the wheel. There are a ton of ABA centers out there. We have in Indiana, where I'm based, there is several Black-owned ABA centers as well. So when you spoke to having a provider that looks like your son, because there's just a different level of comfort and understanding that goes with leaving your baby in the care of someone that looks like you, especially if they have limited speech or they're nonverbal or they have behaviors or whatever that looks like, right? But because of the stigma in the Black community and the lack of trust that we have in certain institutions, what we have encountered is the fact that a lot of times in the Black community, we don't want our babies labeled. We don't want to, and we don't know what we don't know, right? And so what BASE does is we don't necessarily offer any neurodivergent therapy for those that are neurodivergent from a behavioral or psychomotor perspective, right? But what we do offer is a sense of community and connection to community resources. A lot of times we don't know that there are grants out there for families to be able to get additional support, or there's scholarship opportunity. We don't know that there are Black ABA centers out there that are willing to work with us. We don't know that for single moms that say, I can't do all of this stuff because I also have to work, that they'll come to your school. Some of those centers will come to your school, or they'll come get your child. They'll help with transportation. And we don't know that, there are vouchers that are out there, as well, to be able to help with some of these therapies as well. So it's really, it's and we haven't talked about this yet, but the reason that the autism diagnosis is delayed by 2 or 3 years in the Black community is because of 3 different factors. It's the disparity in healthcare. It is the lack of knowledge, the lack of parent knowledge or education, as well as the stigma in the Black community. We are marginalized, but we still other and marginalized people in our own communities, right? Whether you're gender fluid, whether you struggle with mental health, whatever that othering looks like, we ostracize our own people. Especially in the Black community, if you're I had to, personally taking your baby to the family reunion and they're reciting full movies and spinning around,
Yes.
and the other cousins tease them, right? And so what we do with BASE is we have an event every year where we create this environment where it's a sense of community. Families, like, we think we're a unicorn because we don't think there are any other
Yes.
right? And
Right.
so we allow families to meet each other. We also host at the same event, we have a resource fair so that they have all these community
Mhm.
resources that come out and say, whether your child is school age, preschool, adults, because adult services are different from when they're
Yes.
children, residential centers, in case you have to look at that as an option. So we have that as well. And then another thing that we do is we offer what we call our community healing circles. And what those healing circles are, it's a right now we're running them for caregivers, but we're hoping to open it up to adults that are on the spectrum as well once we have that infrastructure. But what those healing circles do is they create a safe space. We journey together for about 10 to 12 weeks. We build a container and we create a safe space where caregivers can say all the hard things that we don't get to say out loud.
Mm.
When that we're struggling, that we blame ourselves, that we are struggling with depression, that we don't know if we're exactly what our child needs.
Yeah.
Take all of those hard things in a safe space and in a open and supportive environment, because we heal in community.
Yeah, and all of those things, right? So I remember when my son was diagnosed, and I was shocked. I couldn't believe it. And so we took him to every single specialist that we could think of. He's been to so many doctors and specialists here in Austin because I just couldn't get my head wrapped around it. And I was the
Yes.
exact same way. I didn't want him labeled because
Yep.
I wanted people to look at the individual and not the label. And so there is a challenge there, because without that label, he can't get services in the school. But with that label, sometimes people only see that label and they don't see the individual. Do you ever experience any of that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think all families do, even within your family, right? So, one of the things that I've learned with autism, especially amongst our friends,
Mm.
is that autism is very isolating. Not
Yes.
everyone understands your child, or they think that their child can catch it, just like they think if your child is gay, they can catch it, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So they
Right.
like, no, you can't go play with such and such.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I've been really blessed with my kids because they are gifted, and I think all of our kids are gifted, right? So whether they're musically inclined or they're amazing readers or whatever that looks like, they're gifted, and it's our job to cultivate those gifts and allow the world to see them as beyond just having someone with autism. And I think believe it was Temple Grandin or her
Mhm.
mom that stated that, I'm different but not less. And that's
Mhm.
been our model, because you're right. People will try to, they'll say that, like, my daughter had four therapists before she was 2 years old. Well, now this baby is singing and she's been to New York and sung at Carnegie Hall,
Wow.
right? But
Okay.
it's really about, first, it has to start with us. We have to believe that the
Mhm.
diagnosis is not a prison sentence. We have to believe that it doesn't mean that I mean, yes, there is grief there, but we have to believe that it doesn't change the fact that our children are amazing and that they can do these amazing and wonderful things. It just means that we have to shift a little bit and help them reach whatever their goals are, maybe in a different way.
And I totally agree with that. I think one of the challenges, at least that I experience, and you touched on this, is the community that's around him. So the churches, the extended family, and educating them. I remember with my small family, grandparents, that we had to retire the R word, and so letting them
Mhm.
know how offensive that was, and reintroduce or introducing the labels of neurodivergent and talking through that. Um, Thankfully, I have very receptive and amazing parents, but it was a shift for them being, of that generation. They, there's offensive labels like slow, and it's like, nah, let's not.
Yeah.
And so I
Let's
hear
not do
that a
that.
lot in the Black community, that thinking that, well, we've always said it doesn't mean anything. It means something to me. And so when you're talking through with the parents and these families and giving them that support and the language to help educate others, which can be daunting, how do you approach that?
Yeah, well, first of all, we have to count our losses early. There are some people that are not going to change. There are the big mamas and all of them that they swear your baby is spoiled and they need a spanking. And no
Oh,
matter how many
yes.
times you say spanking them is like adding fuel to the fire, that's not going to work. Or yelling at them is not going to work. They don't believe that. They believe that we're soft, new
Right.
age, gentle parents. And I'm like, no, trust me, that is not the case, right?
Yes.
So sometimes you just have to understand that not everybody is receptive. But if you have someone that's open and ready to have the conversation, then yes, you want to use words like neurodivergent. Or a lot of times when I talk to my kids, I'm like, babe, it's okay. Your brain just works differently,
Mm-hmm.
right? And even with my mom has been it's been a very difficult because she grew up in Louisiana in the 50s.
Yes.
Right. And so you didn't want to, and I think it also goes back to slavery where for us to be different at all could be a death sentence. We
Mm-hmm.
had to
Yeah.
hide our mental illness. We had to hide a lot of things. Women were trying to hide when they were pregnant, right? So that they wouldn't, be considered not able to work. And so that's the generation that's the mentality that was passed
Yes.
off from generation to generation to generation. So it's hard to change that.
Yeah.
But we just have to be advocates. If you cannot use the right language around my baby, then guess what? You don't get access
Yes.
to him because what we're not going to do is cause harm. And that's the language that we try to help families understand that your children are, whether they are verbal or not, they can hear, they can
Absolutely.
process, they listen, they know energy. If they don't like
Yes.
Uncle such and such, then they got a reason for that.
Right.
Right. And so be mindful, check in with your kids, check in with yourself and just understand that the boundaries that you set, we're not being unreasonable. Sometimes people are trying to make us feel bad
Yes.
because we have these boundaries and we're trying to protect our kids, but we don't want them traumatized. They are
Mm-hmm.
going to have enough challenges without unnecessary trauma.
Yeah. I
You know?
love that. I
Yeah.
love that. I love the fact that you brought up that, and it's something that we struggle with too. His receptive skills are amazing. It's
Hmm.
the expressive, and so trying to give people that language and help them to understand. It's like you can't have those conversations with him because he can process that information. I have had those conversations with his therapist. Like we don't do that.
Hmm.
Do you work with the schools in any capacity? Because one of the challenges that I'm in ed tech, and one of the things that I see is that a lot of our kiddos are misdiagnosed as, and it kind of goes back to what you were saying with the big mama, that they need a spanking or it's behavioral, especially kids of color and
Yes.
males, that they're misdiagnosed and they're sent to the office. So they're taken out of the classrooms.
Hmm.
They're interrupting the education cycle. And then it just continues with this trajectory that they're out of the school, they're suspended. And it's like, whoa, 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 we need to break it down. So do you work any with the schools and how does that work look?
Yeah, so we're starting that work with schools. A lot of what we do now is really, so we partner with some universities to do
Hmm.
parent training, right? So
Okay.
we talk to these parents about some parents, you walk into an IEP meeting, which is individual education plan. You walk into the meeting, a lot of times, unless you're in a inner city school, you're the only person of color. If your husband happens to work and he's not with you or whatever, they assume you're a single parent,
Yes.
right? Because there's a lot of assumptions that go into you walking into this space. And you're exactly right. They push our children into the school to prison pipeline almost immediately. Like by third grade, and there's this saying or this research out that says that depending on how many children can read in the third grade, that's how many prisons they built. Like there's a correlation between that, right?
Mhm.
And so but most schools in most states, the goal is for them to place your child in what they call an LRE or least restrictive environment.
Yes.
Right. And a lot of parents don't necessarily know that. So we make sure that parents know in Indiana it's Article 7. In different states, it's different articles that says, as a parent of a child with a disability, these are all of the rights that you have. This is
Right.
what you can ask the school for. This is how many days they have to respond. If you say in writing, I want another assessment, I
Mhm.
need an addendum, this is not working for us. Right. And so we partner with different educational institutions to provide this type of training. We also partner with some behavioral specialists that, for instance, if we have a parent that says, you know what, I feel like they're really focusing on his behavior, but they're not honoring all of the other parts of his IEP, that means that they're non-compliant, right? And so then we have people that will volunteer their time to go in and be an advocate for those parents during those IEP meeting sessions.
That's amazing.
Yes.
And it's not only amazing, it can change the trajectory of the child and that family. And so
Yes.
having that advocate, because you're absolutely right. We talked about this at the very beginning that as parents, we are shocked, and then we don't have the language and the resources to be able to work within the schools because they're the experts. And so sometimes they're trying to define what that's going to look like for your child. And so our voice sometimes gets lost. Not
Yeah.
mine, other people's
Yeah,
voices.
right. Not mine either.
They hear at the heels of my heels coming down the hall, and they're like, "Oh my God, here she comes again."
Yes.
Yes, but it can get daunting, and I feel like for me personally that when I do this work for my son, that I'm advocating for the parents that don't have the voice, and so I
Mhm.
just wanted. Another reason why I wanted to talk with you is because I want to help any parent that's struggling with that and knowing that they do have a right to advocate for their child and giving them some resources where to go. Unfortunately, we live in Texas. I live in Texas, and I think we're ranked 50th for adults with any kind of disability.
Oh,
It's horrible
wow.
here. Yeah, it's not good. And so it's important for especially the families of color to have this language, to have the resources, to understand what's available to them. And I like this, I do this podcast, not be, one reason because I love meeting interesting people, but it's also if I can just help one person, one family, I feel like it's successful. And I'm hoping that this will reach, change the language, and that we could start adopting new language that's going to be inclusive, that we are going to look at the individual and the gifts that they can give, and then give those parents those resources. And so I appreciate you
Yeah.
sharing this. I think that I also read that you do some work with the churches. Is that correct?
I do. I do. I grew up and I grew up Baptist. I grew up in the church. I also went to seminary.
Okay.
And when I was in seminary, I met at the dean that we had at the time has a son with autism. And so she and I started talking about just kind of when we look at and to back up, so BASE has four Black Autism Support Society BASE. We have four different pillars that we kind of focus on, right? So we look at the individual and the family. So a lot of that support, making sure that we have connection, making sure that we know what's going on, education, educating the parents to see what they know and what they don't know. Social justice. There was a big news story that came out recently about a teen with autism that was shot by the police because he was
Yes.
wielding a knife. And that's a recent story that's been popular. There were stories before that,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
And a lot of times those stories don't get information. So it's really kind of talking to the last time I checked, we only had about 4 states that had comprehensive police training when it came to dealing with people with autism. I know in the state of
Mhm.
Indiana, their training is like simulated and virtual. I mean, it's all
Oh,
on the
wow.
computer. So
That's
how can you
amazing.
really know
No.
what to do? So just kind of working with local organizations that are
Love
putting
that.
communication boards. There was a local organization here that has put communication boards in all the police cars in case someone has limited language and things like that. But then the last pillar is spirituality. And we do that because we are very good in Black churches, specifically in Black churches. We're very good about maybe we'll have a sign language interpreter or an ASL interpreter. We may or may not have larger bulletins printed for people that have, whose eyes are aging, but we
Mhm.
really don't do a lot when it comes to special needs ministry. We just
Mhm.
don't, unless you're a mega church. And I was part of a mega church, and we still didn't have anything, right?
Mm.
And so what happens is, and for the health of the Black church, my argument has been is that if we don't start focusing on the incidence of autism has gone up tremendously. When I first started this journey, I think it was 1 in 150 kids were diagnosed with autism. Now we're like at 1 in 44. So
Mhm.
if you have 50 families in your congregation, at least one of those families is impacted by autism,
Right.
right? And so what I do, or what we do as an organization, is because there's a lot of things that we do, but we go into seminaries. I go to seminaries a couple times, and we will talk to future pastors, or we'll talk to those future clergy, and talk about not only the need to be inclusive of those
Mhm.
individuals in your congregation, but also to be more responsible on how we preach the healing narratives from the Bible,
Mhm.
right? Because it's a
Yes.
lot of times in the Bible, you think, who sinned? Like they'll say, okay, this man was blind. Who sinned? And so we incorporate if something is wrong with our child that we did something wrong. And that's
Amen.
not necessarily the case. right?
Right.
But that's what we take that on because that's the theology that we've been given our entire life. So we go in and we talk about that, and then we also work with church just to just make sure that they are aware and that they're including those families in their worship service. Statistically, 33 families, 33% of families in one study have said that they have left their church because they felt like their child was not included,
Yes.
right?
That's our
Um,
story.
yeah,
Yes.
and so they leave and they go to churches that, I have no beef with multicultural churches, right? But there's just a different feel there. And so then we teach our kids, well, our churches just need to do a better job. So that's basically that's basically what we do. We also have been talking to them about having so, for instance, if you have a 1-year old and they're crying, you can take them to the cry room or you can take them to a nursery or whatever. But if you have someone that's 8 and they're having a meltdown, then there's
Mhm.
no space for them to go. And so we've also been talking to them about sensory rooms or some kind of separate room for those that are overstimulated. Otherwise, the parents can't stay for service. And then
Mhm.
you lose your congregation and then the church dies.
That
Yeah.
is so profound and so accurate. Yes. So I have a couple of questions that I wanted to
Yeah,
ask you. First, you are you're in Indiana, and
I
so a
am.
lot of your work is there. Do you work with parents and families outside of the state of Indiana?
I do. So with our healing circles, those are virtual, and
Mhm.
we've had moms that have been on from the East Coast,
Mhm.
from New York and Atlanta and Chicago, and so we do work with families outside of Indiana. Now, on the other side of that, we are not always aware of what those rights that the parents have in the different state. So a lot
Yes.
of times we'll partner or we'll connect them to someone from like Autism Speaks has different
Mhm.
branches. Autism Society of America, they typically have branches in different states. And so we'll reach out to them and we'll say, hey, I have a mom that's struggling with this particular thing. Do you have a local resource that we can
Mhm.
connect her with?
Yes. So let me ask you this, and hopefully I'll ask it in a way that makes sense. There are some extended members of the family that want to support the immediate family with someone with autism, but they don't know how to show up. Um, do you have any advice for those people, or how do you connect them back into that family so that because they think that I don't know what to say, I don't know, and so it becomes that other, and I just distance myself.
Yeah, yeah. And I had a nephew that had, and he's no longer with us. He passed away when he was 10, but he had cerebral palsy, and I was afraid to babysit him
Mm,
because he had to be tube fed, right?
hmm.
But I also had never really taken the time to learn how to tube feed him. And so when his mom, this is my brother's son, but when his mom, when she said, "Hey, can you watch him?" I said, "I don't know, I've never." And she was like, "That's okay, I'm going to show you." Right. And so she showed me how to do it and she was like, you're not going to hurt them and blah, blah, blah. So my advice and that was a lesson for me. My advice to family members that they want to help, but they
Mhm.
don't know how is to just show up. Being present is everything. Maybe you don't know, you wouldn't be able to handle a meltdown because you wouldn't know what to do. That's okay. But maybe you can do other things that the mom can't do. Like maybe she just needs somebody to make her dinner because she was going to try to make dinner, but then little Johnny had an issue at school, right? Maybe she just needs somebody to show up with her at an IEP meeting to be support. You don't have to
Mhm.
be a specialist in social work to know when somebody's snowballing your family member, right? Or railroading them into some type of
Yes,
whatever thing, right? And so sometimes we just have to we just show up and ask, what can I do? How can I help? And maybe they'll say, okay, these are the things that I'm drowning, I'm struggling. Sometimes it's just listening.
absolutely.
It's just listening. Yeah. A lot of times we deal with, I have 3 children. They all were diagnosed with autism. By diagnosis number 3, that was depressed.
Yes.
Right. And so I had some friends that were like, okay, I haven't heard from you in a couple of days. What we're not going to
Mhm.
do is fall down this rabbit hole.
Right, right.
Right.
Yeah.
And just remind you, sometimes it's just reminding that parent or that person that they are not just a mom, but that they are a whole woman or a whole man and giving them an opportunity to get a release from that in some way that makes them feel fully present with or be able to
Mhm.
reconnect with themselves.
That is perfect. I also heard, and I took away from that, that there is a part for the extended family or the support group to educate themselves, right? And
Yes.
so whether it's the language, whether
Mhm.
it's to understand how to show up for that family, how to interact with that child, how to
Mhm.
support that child, that there has to be some type of ownership of educating yourself. And that we could talk about that with any type of
Mhm.
um, identity or whatever it is. You have to take the step to educate yourself, especially if it's someone that you love and you care about.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's important. Thank you for sharing that. One of the other things that I was going to ask you, so I'm sure you have families that have neurodivergent and neurotypical mix, and so that's how
Mhm.
it is in our family.
Yeah.
How do you work with them, and what's some of the advice that you give so that both children feel like they have equal attention? Because sometimes with our neurodivergent, we seem like we're giving a lot of attention,
Mhm.
and so that neurotypical child is like, "Hey, what about me?" Do you work with
Yeah.
face as
Yeah,
well?
we do. And so what we and there's different things. Sometimes when we have our fun day event, they're like our special volunteers and they get special
Yes.
attention. The siblings, right? Because being a sibling is hard.
Yes.
It's hard because sometimes you have to take on the role of caregiver as well, right?
Yes.
Or your needs are pushed to the side, or sometimes maybe you had a basketball game or a volleyball game, but then your sibling had a meltdown at the game,
Right.
right? And so we always, suggest that they get some type of therapy, somebody to check in with just to say, hey, how are you feeling? How's everything going? Somebody, a safe space where they can process what that means to them. We also suggest that they get some one-on-one time
Mhm.
with their parents. So whether it's date night with dad or, going to the makeup store with mom, some
Yes.
type of date night where it's just about them.
Hmm.
Right. So that may require some type of what we call respite care. And I don't know if they call it respite care in Texas,
They
but
do.
sometimes you can apply for like a waiver, Medicare waiver or something to get some type of respite care. Or if you have a relative that's willing to come over to give you some time with that other sibling. So that way
Mhm.
they feel like they're not an afterthought because
Yes.
sometimes it can feel like that. Yeah.
We have just a few minutes left on this before we get to the end. And I just want to see if you have three things that you can suggest to a new parent that is going through this, that just found out that their child was diagnosed with a neurotypical disorder. What are the three things that you would advise them to do and to make a priority in their family and for themselves?
Yeah, it's funny because I just had this conversation
Oh,
today. I get new moms, specifically moms, right? Every
yes,
once in a
yes.
while we'll get the dad, all the time. And so I had someone today approach me after church. I was like, "Hey, we just got a diagnosis."
Hmm.
And so one of the first things I tell moms is that it's going to be okay,
Hmm.
right? It's gonna because sometimes we take that on like again as if we did something wrong, or our baby's life is over. They're not going to be able to do any of the things that we thought they were going to be able to do. And so we make up these stories in our head immediately because we have this diagnosis.
Yeah.
We don't know what that means yet. And so, but whatever it is, it's going to be fine, right? Like it's going to be okay. The second thing I usually tell my mom, I mean, the parents that I talk to, is to give themselves grace
Mm.
because we want to fix it. We want to fix everything. We want to, and dads want to do it too. But we want to. If our child failed a test, we're like, okay, let's practice these spelling words again. Make
Right.
sure you go get an A next time. So we
Yes,
want to fix it. And if we do, we go down this rabbit hole of research, and we
yes,
started looking at gluten free and casein free and all these different medications that are available. Or what's the holistic approach? And should I send my child to a different school? But I can't really afford that school. Am I a bad parent if I can't afford that school? Give yourself some grace, right? And then the other thing that I tell moms is to connect with another family that has been where you are now because they are a wealth of information. So sometimes it's someone from a lot of times I'll connect them with somebody on our board or another family that says, yes, I'll talk to that parent, especially if they have a child. Like I have a couple of families right now that have teenage boys that are going through hormonal changes. And that is a whole different dynamic. And so I had a mom that was like, I really need to talk to somebody. I said, hey, I got two people that have just gone through that. And
Yes.
they had to figure out what was going on. Hormones were all over the place. They couldn't up in school. They weren't doing that before, because what it does is it saves us so much time, and it helps us to normalize our experience.
Yes.
So we don't feel like we're on an island by ourselves, and we don't feel like our child is like unlike any other child with autism,
Right.
right? So it helps us to get to create like this narrative of, oh, they a lot of them do that when they go through puberty. Or a
Yes.
lot of them do that when they are whatever the next phase of life is, right? And we were able to work, we can get to the other side of that, if we have the right information.
Yeah, I love that. So that's very helpful.
Yeah.
One of the things that I took away from that is that sense of community, especially for the Black community, making sure that we know that we're not alone and that other people are going through this journey, and together we can get through it better. So I love that.
Yeah.
Before we're going to get into, well, since you asked me a question in just a moment, before we
Okay.
do that, there are some resources that you have available on your site, and I'm
Mhm.
going to direct the listeners to that site. Are there any other resources or tools that you would recommend for anyone listening?
Yeah, I would find a group.
Hmm.
You got to find a group. There is a, and I don't know if they're still accepting, but like on Facebook, I found this group called Autism Mocha Moms,
Oh,
and they're everywhere, right? They're from
yes.
everywhere. But it was like, because there's a lot of autism support groups online,
Mhm.
but not all of them are geared towards our kids.
Yes.
Right, because
Yeah.
in my experience, when you talk to a non-Black family about your child with autism, they don't have to deal with the same layer of concerns that we have. If their daughter is out driving at midnight versus my son out driving at midnight, and they both have sensory issues, and when you put the sirens on my son, he's not going to necessarily comply. Then to me, that's a death threat sentence or a safety concern, but for you, it's an inconvenience,
Oh, yes.
right? And so you need to have a community of another Black family, at least one,
Hmm.
that kind of, and even if their child isn't verbal but yours is, there's still so many similarities there. So I would basically look for resources online, make sure that they're reputable. Try to find some type of support group or circle or sister circle that
Mm.
can help walk you through this process. Because there's going to be some days where you're like, oh, we got this in the bag. And there are going to be other days where I say, okay, we had an autism day today.
Yeah.
Like, it's like I'm not okay.
And a couple of things I would also add to that is keep your sense of humor. Um,
Yes.
thank goodness my son was paired up with a mother with an amazing sense of humor, because sometimes there are days where I just want to start crying, but then I think this kid is hilarious. Um, I mean, we have glass all over the place, but he's still hilarious.
Yeah.
And another thing that I did was I actually worked with we live in a smaller, right outside of Boston. And so I worked with the chief of police here, introduced my son, just in case something does happen. I wanted them to be aware and that they
Yes.
know how to engage, because he may not necessarily respond the way you wanted him to respond. And so
Yes.
just building that community with other people and within wherever you're living, I think that's
Mhm.
important.
Absolutely.
Oh, right. All right. Well, this is I could stay here and talk to you all night, but thank you so much.
Same.
So we're going to go to the end of it. It's, well, since you asked me, I just ask a random question. We're
Okay.
recording this before Easter. And so I'm going to ask, how does your family typically celebrate Easter? Is there anything unique that you do?
Um, no, we get together and we always go to church, but
Yes.
we make dinner and we eat it, but no, we
Yeah.
don't do, I think because we're all, except for my daughter, because she's kind of hit and miss, but all of us serve in ministry every Sunday. And so and my middle son he serves with the media team. My older son is like the music director at a church, so he covers like all the band. My husband is like part of the security, and I serve in different capacities. So we're just grateful to have a Sunday where we're not running around to all these different services, and we can eat some yams and some some
That sounds
cabbage.
amazing.
Yeah, so no,
Yeah.
nothing special.
No,
Yeah.
that sounds special. You have have that together time, that family time, and that is special. I'm still making Easter baskets. My kids are in their 20s and they still want me to make an Easter basket. I was like, you're the most spoiled children ever, but I love you. So I will be doing that. Again, I appreciate you for the work that you're doing. I
Thank you.
appreciate you as a mother, and as a community and a support system. So thank you so much for spending time with me today. And I want to wish you and your family an amazing Easter. And hopefully we may join back up for another conversation at some particular point. So thank you
Yep.
so much.
Thank you. Thank you too. Thanks for having me, and happy Easter to you and your family as well.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap for this episode of Well, Since You Asked Me. I hope this conversation left you with something to think about, something to question, or maybe even something to share. I would like to thank our executive producer, John Dunson, audio and video technician, Ryan Sexton, and graphic designer, Ellen Jacobs. If you enjoyed today's session, be sure to subscribe, leave a review, and spread the word. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and keep asking the questions that matter. Bye.